Thomas arrived at the border town market just after sunrise, when the dust was still low and the traders were still calling out prices. He had driven his wagon a long distance because he needed help for the coming season. His ranch was large, the work was heavy, and winter had damaged more fences than he could repair alone. He came with the simple goal of finding one worker who could help him through the hardest months. Nothing more. But as soon as he stepped into the wide, noisy market yard, he noticed that the day would not be simple for anyone. People were lined up in rows, men, women, and older boys waiting for buyers. They were from different places, different tribes, different troubles. Some had been taken during border raids. Some were debt prisoners. Some were people whose villages had been pushed out by harsh weather and bad luck. Thomas did not feel comfortable here. But life in the frontier towns was not gentle. Still, he walked forward carefully, trying to see each person as a human being, not as property the traders wanted him to see. He studied the first line. A tall man with strong arms, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, a young man who kept looking down at the ground. Buyers around him whispered about strength, about cost, about how much work each person could do. Thomas listened, but did not like their tone. He kept moving. Then he reached the last row, and everything around him seemed to quiet down for a moment. She was standing at the far end, separate from the others, as if even the ground she stood on belonged to her alone. She was an Apache woman. Young but not fragile, with dark braided hair and a straight posture that showed pride even when life had been harsh. Her name, he did not know yet, but the traders called her the last one, because everyone else had been sold many times before. Yet she remained. Her hands were tied loosely in front of her, not to hurt her, but because the traders were afraid she might run. But even in the rope, she didn't look defeated. Her eyes were sharp, steady, almost challenging, as if she was silently telling the world she would not be broken by fear or shame. Thomas watched buyers walk past her. Some stared for a moment, whispered something, then moved on quickly. Others shook their heads. One trader even said loudly, "She's trouble. No one wants her. Too proud. Too quiet. She won't listen." The woman heard all of it, yet she still looked straight ahead. She refused to lower her gaze. She refused to let anyone see weakness. That caught Thomas's attention more than anything. He had seen proud people before. But this was different. Her pride was quiet, calm, not aggressive. It looked like something she was born with, something that no hardship could erase. There was also something else in her expression, the strength of someone who had survived loss but refused to surrender hope. Thomas kept watching her from a distance, trying to understand what he was feeling. He had not come here looking for anyone specific, yet something about her presence felt important, like a moment he should not ignore. The main trader finally stepped forward and raised his voice. "Last chance. Every person is sold except this one. Anyone willing to take her? She's strong. She can work. But she's different." People laughed softly. A few men shook their heads again. One woman whispered to her husband, "Don't even think of it. You'll have trouble every day." The trader grew annoyed. "If no one buys her, we'll send her to the northern camp. They'll know what to do with her there." The woman finally moved her eyes slightly. Not with fear, but with the understanding that her fate might soon be decided by strangers again. She did not plead. She did not speak. She did not show panic. But there was a small change in her breathing, like she was preparing herself for something unpleasant yet familiar. Thomas felt something tighten in his chest. He looked at her, at the rope, at the tired dust on her clothes, at the calm dignity in her face. He imagined her being pushed into another place where she would be treated harshly, where people would not even try to understand her. Something inside him said that he could not allow that. He stepped forward. "I'll take her." His voice was soft but clear enough that the crowd turned around. Several people stared at him in surprise. The trader blinked, not expecting anyone to speak. "You?" the trader asked. "Are you sure? She's unlike the others." Thomas nodded. "I'm sure. But you haven't asked anything about her," the trader said. "She doesn't talk much. She doesn't respond to orders quickly. She might never trust you." "That's fine," Thomas replied. The trader shrugged, almost laughing. "Your money, your choice. But remember, you can't bring her back." Thomas walked closer, but not too close. He didn't want to frighten her. He kept enough distance to show respect. She looked at him slowly, her eyes cautious, trying to understand why he of all people would choose her when everyone else had turned away. He didn't know what to say to her. Words felt small. So he only gave a small nod, a gesture that said he saw her, not as a problem, but as a person. The trader untied her rope and handed it to Thomas. But Thomas immediately put the rope down on the ground. He didn't want it. The woman blinked, as if surprised. The crowd murmured. But Thomas stayed calm. "You don't need that," he said gently. She did not run. She did not step back. Instead, she stood exactly as she had before. Except now she looked at him with a new question in her eyes. They walked slowly toward his wagon. Thomas stayed a few steps ahead. Giving her space, she followed quietly, her steps light, her movements controlled. She did not ask where they were going. She did not look behind her. She only climbed into the wagon carefully and sat on one side, her posture straight, as always. As Thomas climbed up to take the reins, he glanced at her again, not to judge her, not to examine her, but simply to acknowledge her presence. She looked back at him for a brief moment. Her expression was unreadable, a mix of curiosity and distrust, but something else too. She seemed to be wondering why he had chosen her when he could have chosen anyone else. The wagon began moving. The market noise faded behind them. Wind brushed across the dry land, lifting her hair slightly. She held her hands together on her lap, still alert but no longer tense. Thomas cleared his throat softly. "My ranch is a few hours from here," he said. "There's food, water, a place to rest. You don't have to work until you're ready." She did not answer, but he had not expected her to. It was enough for him to speak the truth. She watched the road ahead, her face calm, but thoughtful. For the first time, she seemed to allow herself a small breath of relief. As they traveled, Thomas thought about what he had done. He had not chosen her out of pity. He had not chosen her because she was the cheapest worker. He had chosen her because something inside him refused to let her be pushed into a harsher fate. There was a strength in her that deserved respect, not punishment. He didn't know if she would trust him. He didn't know what her past was or what pain she carried. But he knew one thing with quiet certainty. He would treat her with dignity. He would not speak to her the way the traders did. He would not control her. He would not take her spirit away. The land changed slowly from dusty plains to thin patches of grass. Mountains rose far in the distance. Birds flew low across the sky. The world felt wide and open, like a place where people might grow again if given a chance. The woman watched the land with cautious eyes, noticing every movement, every shift in the wind. Her face softened just a little, the smallest sign that she recognized freedom, even if it was new and uncertain. Thomas held the reins loosely. He didn't look at her again. He wanted her to feel safe, not observed. But inside, he hoped she would eventually understand something important. He hadn't chosen her because she was the last one left. He had chosen her because she was the only one he couldn't walk away from. The journey continued in quiet peace. And though no words were spoken, something gentle began to change in the space between them. Something that neither of them knew how to name yet, but both of them could feel. Thomas reached his ranch with the Apache woman just before sunset. The sky was turning a deep orange, stretching shadows across the land. The air felt different here, quieter, safer, almost like the world was giving both of them a moment to breathe. The horses stopped near the porch, and Thomas stepped down first. He didn't reach for her hand or offer help unless she asked. He simply moved aside so she could step down freely without feeling controlled. She took a moment, studying the house, the barn, the open fields around them, and then climbed down with balanced steps, showing she was always aware of her surroundings. Thomas pointed toward the porch. "You can rest inside. There's food and water." His voice was low and calm. He didn't want to scare her or make her feel ordered around. She looked at him briefly but didn't speak. Still, she walked toward the house with measured steps. Her eyes moved over everything: the wooden stairs, the worn railing, the tools leaning near the door. She was studying the place like someone who needed to understand every detail for safety. Inside the house, the room smelled faintly of pine wood and old coffee. There was a small table with 2 chairs, shelves with simple food, and a fireplace made of heavy stones. Thomas brought a bowl of warm stew and placed it on the table. Then he stepped back, letting her decide whether she wanted it. She hesitated for just a moment, then slowly sat down and began to eat. Her movements were careful, as if she didn't want to appear needy, but Thomas could see she was hungry. He didn't sit across from her. Instead, he stood near the window, giving her room. He knew trust wasn't built by force. It was built by patience. After she finished, he showed her the small spare room at the back of the house. It had a simple bed, with a thick blanket and a wooden chest for storage. "You can rest here," he said. "If you need anything, I'll be outside." She didn't answer, but she stepped inside quietly. The moment she was alone, she touched the blanket gently, as if testing whether it was real. She had slept in cold places, rough places, places without comfort. This simple bed felt strange, almost too kind. She sat down, but she didn't lie back. She was not ready to sleep deeply in a new place. Her mind was alert even when her body was tired. Thomas went outside and fed the horses, giving them fresh water. He worked in silence, but his thoughts kept returning to her. He wondered if she felt safe, or if his home reminded her of something painful. He didn't know anything about her past, and he didn't want to push her to tell him. She would speak when she was ready. Until then, kindness was the only language he would offer. That night, the wind grew stronger. Clouds covered the moon, and the sound of distant thunder rolled across the land. Thomas knew storms could come quickly in this region. He checked the windows and made sure the barn doors were locked. Then he sat near the fireplace, reading an old book. But he couldn't focus on the words. Something felt unsettled. From the back room, he heard a soft sound. Not loud, not clear, more like a breath taken sharply. Then another. He stood slowly and walked toward her door, but he didn't step inside. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. There was no answer. But the silence wasn't peaceful. It felt heavy, tight. He waited, hoping she would speak, but she didn't. Instead, he heard a faint noise, like someone trying to breathe through fear. He didn't want to open the door without permission, so he spoke softer. "If you want, I can bring a lamp, or sit outside the room, so you don't feel alone." Still no answer, but the storm outside cracked loudly, and lightning lit the hallway. In that brief flash, he saw her through the half-open door. She was sitting on the floor beside the bed, knees drawn close, eyes wide, not with fear of the house, but of a memory. The thunder had reminded her of something from her past, something she couldn't shake. Thomas stepped slowly into the doorway but stayed far from her. "It's only the storm," he said gently. "The wind makes it sound worse than it is." She didn't look at him, but he could see her shoulders trembling. He realized she wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid of something else, something the thunder brought back. He felt helpless for a moment, unsure how to reach her without overstepping. So he did the simplest thing he could. He placed a lantern on the ground a few feet from her and sat down on the opposite side of the hallway, keeping a respectful distance. He didn't move closer. He didn't talk right away. He just sat quietly, showing he was there without trying to invade her space. After a long moment, he began to speak in a slow, steady tone. "When I was young, storms scared me too," he said. "I used to think the sky was breaking open. My father would sit with me and tell me that storms sound louder than they are. The clouds fight each other, not us." She listened. He could see her breathing slow, slightly. Encouraged, he continued. "Sometimes the wind makes the old boards creak. Sometimes the thunder echoes off the hills. But none of it can hurt you in here." The woman finally lifted her eyes, just enough to look at the lantern. The warm light softened the shadows in the room. Her face no longer looked frozen. Instead, she looked like someone fighting to control old pain. Thomas stayed where he was, and his calm presence seemed to help. The storm outside roared and shook the windows again. But she no longer gasped. Instead, she watched him, studying how he stayed steady. Something inside her began to shift, not full trust, but something small and new, a beginning. After the storm passed, she stood slowly, steadying herself. She didn't speak, but she nodded once the smallest but clearest sign of thanks. Thomas nodded back, stood, and walked out quietly. He left the lantern with her, so the room wouldn't feel too dark. The next morning, she rose early and walked outside. Thomas was feeding the chickens. He noticed her, but didn't rush over. She approached the water pump, tested the handle, and began filling a bucket. She carried it toward the animals without needing to be asked. It wasn't obedience. It was her way of showing she understood the ranch. She needed work, and she wanted to help. Thomas smiled softly but said nothing. He didn't want her to feel like she owed him anything. But seeing her take steps toward normal life warmed something deep inside him. Over the next few days, a quiet routine formed. She helped mend small things, loose boards, torn ropes, broken tools. She was skilled with her hands, quick to notice details Thomas often missed. She moved with grace, as if she belonged to the land itself. She never spoke, but she listened. She watched. She learned the rhythm of the ranch. And slowly, she began to understand something important. Thomas never gave orders. He only made suggestions. He never stood too close. He never touched her without letting her choose the distance. He respected her space in a world where people rarely respected someone like her. One afternoon, Thomas brought a blanket to the porch and left it there without saying a word. The nights were getting colder. When she later picked it up and wrapped it around herself, she looked at him through the window. His back was turned as he chopped firewood. He wasn't watching her. He wasn't waiting for her reaction. He had given the blanket simply because she needed it. That was the moment when she felt a small crack in the walls she had built for so long. She had met people who took, people who commanded, people who broke spirits. Thomas was none of those. He acted not out of power, but out of respect. One evening, when the sun dipped low and the sky glowed red, she stood near the fence watching the horses run across the field. Thomas walked up slowly and stopped several feet away. "They're wilder than they look," he said with a faint smile, "but they calm down when they know they're safe." She looked at the horses, then at him. Something in his words felt familiar. She understood he wasn't talking only about the animals. He looked down at the ground, unsure if he should continue. "You don't have to stay forever," he said. "But while you're here, I want you to know this place is safe. I won't harm you. I won't force you. You can take your time. I won't harm you. I won't harm you. I won't harm you." For the first time since arriving, her expression softened, not fully, but enough to show she understood his meaning. She gave a slow, careful nod. It wasn't trust yet, but it was a step toward it. Days turned into weeks. The ranch seemed warmer with her presence. She worked with quiet determination, and Thomas never once treated her like property. He asked her preference before making decisions that involved her. He stepped aside so she could walk freely. He respected her silence instead of pushing her to speak. And little by little, she began to trust him not because he demanded it, but because he never demanded anything at all. One cold night, Thomas found her sitting quietly under the stars. He didn't interrupt. He simply placed a cup of warm tea near her and walked away. She watched him go, and for the first time, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: safety without conditions. Inside her heart, a truth began to grow. Thomas had not chosen her because she was unwanted. He had chosen her because he saw her worth long before she saw it in herself. The weeks passed quietly on the ranch, and the Apache woman slowly became part of its daily rhythm. She rose before sunrise, helped with the animals, repaired tools, and watched the land with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Thomas noticed she had a natural sense of direction, a deep understanding of weather, and an ability to move silently through the fields. She still hadn't spoken, but her silence no longer seemed like fear. It felt like a choice, a language she trusted more than words. Thomas respected that. He didn't rush her. He didn't ask questions about her past. He simply worked beside her, offering kindness where needed and space everywhere else. Over time, the distance between them grew softer. She began to accept small gestures: a cup of tea, a blanket, a seat near the fire, but she always kept a careful watch on the world around her. It was clear she had lived through danger, and danger had taught her to stay alert. One cool morning, as thin clouds covered the sun, Thomas noticed her standing at the edge of the field, staring at the horizon with unusual tension. Her body looked ready, like someone waiting for something. Thomas walked toward her but stopped a few steps behind. "Everything all right?" he asked gently. She lifted her hand slightly, a quiet signal for him to stay silent. He understood immediately. She wasn't afraid. She was sensing something. A moment later, he heard it too. Hoofbeats. Several horses. Slow at first, then louder. The Apache woman didn't move, but Thomas saw her shoulders tighten. Whoever was coming wasn't coming by accident. Within minutes, 3 riders appeared on the road, dust rising behind them. Thomas recognized one of them, the same man who had mocked him at the market weeks ago. The riders came straight toward the ranch, stopping near the fence. Their horses snorted and stomped the ground. The riders looked down with unfriendly faces. The leader, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, called out loudly, "Thomas, we need a word." Thomas stepped forward calmly. "What do you want?" 7. The man glanced at the Apache woman, who stood a few feet behind Thomas, her posture firm, her eyes cold. The rider smirked. "You know exactly what we want," he said. "You've got someone on your land who doesn't belong to you, or to anyone." Thomas felt anger rise, but he kept his voice steady. The man laughed harshly. "Choice? Don't fool yourself. She belongs with her people, or with the men who captured her, or in the northern camps. Not here." Thomas took a slow breath. "You're not taking her." The other riders shifted in their saddles. Their eyes were calculating, waiting for an excuse to act. The Apache woman watched them closely, her expression unchanged. But Thomas sensed danger gathering around her like a storm cloud. The scarred rider leaned forward. "You think you can protect her? You live alone. You're outnumbered. And the law's on our side." Thomas stood tall. "Not today." For a long moment, no one moved. Wind brushed the tall grass. The horses snorted. The tension between the riders and Thomas grew sharper, tighter. Then the leader clicked his tongue and turned his horse away. "This isn't over," he said. "We'll be back." They galloped away, leaving dust in the air and silence behind them. The Apache woman remained still for a moment. Then she turned and walked toward the barn. Thomas followed, worried. She didn't look angry or afraid. She looked thoughtful, like someone calculating a problem. Inside the barn, she checked the tools, the ropes, the state of the doors. Thomas watched her carefully. "They won't come back soon," he said. She paused and looked at him, her dark eyes steady. It was the first time he understood what she wanted to tell him without words. She didn't believe the danger was gone. She knew men like those riders rarely gave up easily. That night, the air grew colder. The moon was hidden behind clouds, and the land felt heavy, as if waiting for something. Thomas couldn't sleep. He walked to the window again and again, checking the fields. The Apache woman was awake too. She sat near the fire, sharpening a small tool, her face calm. Around midnight, just when the night became its darkest, she stood suddenly. Thomas heard it too, a faint crackling sound. Not thunder, not animals. Something else. He grabbed his coat and stepped outside. The moment he opened the door, he smelled smoke. The barn. Flames licked the sides of the wooden walls, spreading fast. The sky glowed orange, and the horses inside panicked, kicking and screaming against their stalls. Thomas ran toward the barn without thinking, but the Apache woman raced ahead of him, moving faster than he had ever seen her. When they reached the burning structure, Thomas saw shadows behind the flames, 3 men slipping away into the darkness. The riders. They had come back, just like she expected. But she didn't chase them. She focused on the fire. Thomas grabbed a bucket, but the fire was already too strong. The roof beams cracked loudly. Smoke filled the air. He coughed, forcing himself inside to untie the horses. The heat burned against his skin. The horses were terrified, thrashing wildly. Thomas tried to calm them, but the smoke stung his eyes, making it hard to see. Then he felt a firm hand on his arm. The Apache woman had entered the burning barn without hesitation. She stepped past him, calm in the chaos, and untied the first horse with practiced hands. She whispered something soft in her own language, a sound gentle enough to cut through the panic. The horse stilled, then ran out through the opening she created. They worked together. She moved quickly, guiding the animals, while Thomas pushed fallen beams aside. Flames roared, beams collapsed, and the air grew hotter by the second. But neither of them stopped. When the last horse finally escaped, Thomas felt his strength fading. The smoke was too thick. He stumbled, coughing hard. The fire crackled dangerously close. Suddenly, the Apache woman grabbed his sleeve and pulled him toward the exit with surprising strength. He fell forward into fresh air, just as part of the roof collapsed behind them. They landed on the ground, both gasping, both covered in ash. Thomas looked at her with wide eyes, realizing she had saved his life. She stared back, her chest rising and falling quickly, soot covering her face, but her eyes sharp. For the first time, she reached out and touched his arm, not out of fear or obligation, but out of concern. A connection passed between them, silent yet clear. She wasn't just someone he protected anymore. She was someone who protected him too. The sheriff arrived an hour later, drawn by the fire's glow. He inspected the damage with a serious face and listened to Thomas's explanation. The Apache woman stood behind Thomas the entire time, her expression unreadable, but her presence solid. When Thomas finished, the sheriff nodded. "I believe you. Those men have been causing trouble in town. I'll look for them." But his voice held doubt. He knew those men were good at disappearing. The sheriff left, and the ranch grew quiet again. The flames died down, leaving only smoldering wood and smoke rising into the night sky. Thomas stared at the ruins of his barn, feeling a heavy ache. It wasn't just a building. It held memories, tools, and the efforts of many years. Beside him, The Apache woman watched the smoke with calm eyes. She didn't speak, but she knelt and touched the ground gently, as if promising something to the land itself. Then she stood and faced him. For a moment, Thomas didn't know what to say. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice rough. "You saved my life." She didn't smile, but something softened in her eyes, a quiet understanding that needed no words. She turned toward the house, expecting him to follow. That night, as Thomas sat near the fire inside his home, he realized something important. The events of the night had changed something between them forever. She no longer looked at him with only caution. Now she looked at him with a different kind of recognition, the kind reserved for someone who had stood beside her in danger and survived. They were no longer strangers, forced together by circumstance. They were allies. Two people who had faced flames together. And deep inside, Thomas knew that the bond formed that night would lead to a truth neither of them had. The morning after the fire felt strangely quiet, as if the land itself was tired from the night's chaos. Thin smoke still drifted from the blackened wood where the barn had once stood. The horses grazed nervously nearby. Unsettled, but alive. Thomas stood in the cool morning air, staring at the ruins. His muscles ached, his clothes were scorched, and a faint burn mark ran along his forearm. The Apache woman stood beside him, silent as always. But her presence was steady. She was covered in dried soot and dust. Her hair was tied back. Her expression, calm. She did not look at the ruined barn. She looked at Thomas. She seemed to be studying his face carefully, as if trying to understand the weight he carried. She reached out slowly and touched the burn on his arm with gentle fingers. Her touch was light, not meant to cause discomfort. He held his breath without knowing why. It wasn't the pain, it was the kindness in her gesture. A kindness he did not expect from someone who had lived through so much fear, danger, and mistrust. "You saved me," he said quietly. She didn't respond with words, but she gave a small, firm nod. That nod felt stronger than any long speech could ever be. It was her way of saying she valued his life as much as he valued hers. The two of them spent the day repairing what could be saved. Thomas cut away, burned wood, while she gathered usable pieces for future building. She moved with sharp efficiency, her steps precise. She didn't complain or grow frustrated, not even once. Thomas admired her strength more than he could ever express. Later, when the sun grew warm and the ashes cooled, she walked toward the storage shed. Inside, she found tools, spare boards, and old nails. She began sorting everything into neat piles. Thomas watched, surprised at her attention to detail. It was as if she had decided that rebuilding the ranch wasn't just his duty anymore, it was hers too. As the hours passed, townsfolk came by to see the damage. Some offered apologies. Others offered help. But many stared at the Apache woman with suspicion. They whispered quietly, wondering why she was still there, why she worked beside Thomas like an equal. Thomas felt protective anger rising in him, but she ignored the whispers completely. Her focus stayed on the land, the tools, and the quiet work in front of her. In the late afternoon, the sheriff returned. He dismounted with a serious expression. Thomas came forward, wiping sweat from his forehead. The Apache woman observed from a distance, but her gaze was sharp. "I have news," the sheriff said. "We found tracks heading north. Looks like the men who attacked your barn left the territory." Thomas clenched his jaw. "So, they got away." "For now," the sheriff answered. "I'll send word to the northern patrols, but you should stay cautious." He looked toward the Apache woman. She met his gaze without fear. The sheriff nodded. With respect, a gesture rare for someone in his position. But she didn't react. After giving a few warnings and promising to return if he learned more, he mounted his horse and rode off. When he was gone, Thomas noticed something in her face relief. But only a small one. She was too experienced to believe danger disappeared so easily. Still, she turned back to their work. And Thomas followed. By evening, both of them sat on the porch steps, tired but calmer. The sun painted the sky in soft shades of gold and pink. A light breeze brushed across the ranch, carrying the scent of fresh grass mixed with faint smoke. Thomas rested his arms on his knees. The Apache woman sat beside him, her posture straight as always. He didn't want to break the quiet, but something important lay on his mind. He turned toward her. "I want to show you something," he said softly. She looked at him, waiting. Thomas stood, walked inside the house, and returned with a folded paper. It wasn't old, but it carried serious meaning. He sat down again and unfolded it carefully. She watched the paper closely, noticing every movement. "These are your freedom papers," he said gently. "It means no one can claim you again. Not traders, not riders, not anyone. Not even me." She didn't move at first. Her eyes studied the paper. Freedom. A word that carried 1,000 meanings. A word she had chased and lost many times before. She reached for the paper slowly, almost cautiously, and held it in both hands. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of something she never thought she would see. Thomas cleared his throat. "I wanted to give them to you earlier, but I didn't want to overwhelm you. You deserve to choose your own life. Where you go. What you do. It's all up to you now. 1. She looked up at him, her eyes shining not with tears, but with something more powerful, gratitude mixed with disbelief. She seemed to be searching his face, trying to see if there was any hidden intention. There wasn't. His expression was open, honest, calm. "You've worked hard here," he said. "You helped me save the horses. You saved my life. But you don't owe me anything. If you want to leave, I understand." For a long moment, there was silence. Only the wind moved, lifting the edge of the paper she held. She stared at it again. Freedom. It was everything she thought she wanted. Everything she thought would bring her peace. But she realized something unexpected. Peace was not a place. It was a person. And she had found it here, on this ranch, with a man who never treated her like property, never raised his voice, never tried to break her spirit. Respect without conditions, space without pressure. She folded the paper slowly and held it against her chest. Then, she stood up. Thomas rose too, unsure of what she would do next. She walked toward the horizon, where the mountains glowed with the last light of day. Thomas felt his heart sink. Maybe she was leaving. Maybe she needed space to think. Maybe freedom meant walking away. And he had known that was a possibility. But then she turned around. She walked back to him with steady steps, stood in front of him, and placed the folded freedom paper into his hands. Not rejecting it, but giving her answer through action. She wasn't leaving. Thomas stared at the paper, confused for a moment. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly. She raised her head proudly and nodded, firm, certain, unshaken. Her eyes told him everything. Her voice never needed to speak. She wanted to stay. Not because she couldn't leave. Not because she had nowhere else to go. But because she had chosen him. Just as he had once chosen her. A warm, quiet understanding fell between them. Thomas carefully put the paper away, respecting the importance of her choice. He didn't reach for her. He didn't speak more than needed. He simply stepped aside, allowing her to stand beside him on equal ground. Together, they looked at the darkening sky. The land around them felt new again. Reborn, hopeful. The ranch was damaged, but rebuildable. The bond between them, however, was stronger than any wooden barn could ever be. She gently picked up a small wooden beam from the ground and handed it to him. It was her way of saying she wanted to rebuild with him. To build a home. Not just a shelter. A future. Not just survival. Thomas smiled softly. understanding her message perfectly. From that day forward, they worked side by side not because fate had pushed them together, but because they had chosen each other freely. The world around them still held dangers, still held judgment, still held uncertainty. But the ranch, the land, and the quiet trust growing between them became the place where two wounded lives finally found something they never expected. They found belonging. Not forced, not taken, chosen. And for both of them, that was the true start of everything.